But why don't we start this edition of the show with Sunday's news, Herc, about the 2026 World Cup, which of course we know will be held in the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And of course, over the weekend, it was announced where the games will be played. The final, July 19th, 2026, at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, just outside of New York City. This contrary to earlier reports that had Dallas as the winning bid. Dallas does get 9 games, though. That's more than any other city. Among those games will be one semifinal. The other semifinal will be in Atlanta. And the tournament opener, which no surprise will feature Mexico, will be played June 11th at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, of course, the site of the 1970 and 1986 World Cup finals. So we have it now, Herc. The next World Cup final will be played in the New York, New Jersey area. Are you cool with it?
Okay. Let me tell you why I am cool with it. Because number one in my eyes, and in many eyes, and Mad Dog referenced it, SoFi. It's one of the most spectacular stadiums I've ever been in my life. It's probably by far the best stadium in the world today. I can't tell you how incredibly upset I am that the powers that be, Stan Kroenke, who happens to own a soccer team, not one, but two. One of those being here in the United States, the other one being in Arsenal, didn't have the foresight for his architects or for the design to include a potential facilitating of a World Cup final. You know, ripping out the suites or retractable seats, whatever you want for the suites, whatever the case may be, to make it a final, or just not care like Jerry Jones and willing to do that. It may have been concessions, it may have been negotiations with the city, it may have been negotiations with FIFA. They didn't come to terms. I'm incredibly upset at that. It should have been Los Angeles. But given the fact that it's not Los Angeles, I'd much rather have it in the East Coast, in New York, New Jersey, than in Arlington. The World Cup final deserves respect. Not that it wouldn't have been respectable in Arlington, but everything about the East Coast in that market makes sense if it's not LA. And they have an advantage that LA doesn't have, which is East Coast time. This is accessible to the world. If it was on the West Coast, it would have been a little bit more difficult as far as timing. East Coast makes it a little bit more easy. But Mad Dog's probably right in the fact that getting in and out of the stadium is going to be a pain. He's not right in the amount of football played. I'm from California. I live in California. There's a ton of football being played here, but it's just not knowing your history. I mean, every single figure in U.S. soccer's history has come out of literally that place, New Jersey. There are plenty of soccer, plenty of football that's being played out there. That won't be an issue. But I don't have a problem with this given the options.
I'm cool with it, Herc. As an East Coast guy, obviously I'm going to be cool with it. And to your point about the history, there's some poetic justice here. At least if you look at the modern history of the game in this country, so much of it hails from New Jersey. So it's cool to see that state get, I think, a very well-deserved final for their contributions to the game. I'm shocked at this announcement, not just because we heard for months, by the way, from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean that it was going to be Dallas, but because the obvious choice here from a risk aversion standpoint is Dallas. We talked about this. Dallas has a roof. And so you can control for weather if you have a stadium with a roof. It's interesting, as you read the articles about FIFA's decision-making here, they say they're looking at weather patterns. Have they ever known what's happened in mid to late July in the Northeast? I mean, there's a million ways, Herc, that this can go wrong for you. One, you can get terrible heat, which would impact the final, how the game is played. One, you could get terrible rain, which would impact the final. You could still play the game, but it will impact how it'll be played. And the worst case scenario is you get, and this happens all the time in the Northeast, in the deep, deep of summer, you get a lightning storm. And then not only does it impact the game, it impacts, you're talking about East Coast time. The reason you want East Coast time is for the television. And you get a lightning delay and your television windows collapse. Guess what, Herc? This is all about money. And what drives money? Your TV ratings. You get a delay, those ratings can literally collapse. So that to me is really the shock here. So you got to think, well, why would FIFA take that risk? And I think it's what you're talking about. It's the perceived prestige of New York City. Now, I don't know what your opinion is. It is not my opinion that New York City is greater than Dallas or whatever, but Arlington. Think about it from a FIFA standpoint, right? You're trying to talk to your international sponsors, your fancy European sponsors to convince them to spend, what, $10, $15 million on an event, an activation. That's probably cheap, right? To buy a suite at this is going to be probably $20 million, if not more. It's much easier to sell that in New York City than I think it would be selling that in Dallas to the major corporate sponsors that FIFA already has one and is going to be chasing for this event. So to me, I think there's a major risk here for FIFA, but obviously, Herc, they know what they're doing. What's very interesting is that what has not been announced is the time of the game, and that's going to have a bearing on the weather as well. If you remember back to 1994,
you took it.
They played at noon local time out there on the West Coast.
Do you remember that game?
Yeah, I do remember that game, and people remember the Roberto Baggio penalty miss, and they remember Brazil's kind of return to glory. It was a terrible final.
0-0.
It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit at kickoff.
Yes.
And you could have lightning, or you could have that in New York. That's a real possibility.
Yeah, you took it from me. I was literally going to bring up 1994, the World Cup final, because the 1994 World Cup, to this date, till this day, is the most successful World Cup in the history of the men's game. Well, that final was one of the worst finals or worst displays of football you will ever see, given the fact that it was the last game for both teams. Players had no legs. You're in the dead of summer. Trust me, I used to live in Pasadena. It's no joke out there with the heat. I'm glad you brought up the retractable roof. That would have been essential in a situation like this.
It's a safe choice, and I think it's why Dallas gets so many games, right? More than anybody else. So Jerry Jones can hang his cowboy hat on something down there.
I think the fact that Dallas gets so many games is a consolation prize for Jerry than it is that it's a amazing venue, though it is.
Yeah. What could be cool, too, is kind of a redemption for Messi. If you think about 10 years ago, what will have been 10 years ago at that time, 2016 Copa Americas Centenario is at MetLife, right? And he misses the first penalty in that shootout. And if you remember, that kind of sparked his stepping back from the national team. So what a full circle moment it would be if he gets his second World Cup in the same stadium, where you could argue it was the low point of his national team career, losing to Chile in that Copa America final.
For the second time. For the second
time in a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, who could forget 2015? Should we mention Gianni Infantino's wardrobe at the announcement? Or
Oh, jeez.
What was? Hey, I don't know anything about style. I don't know anything about style, bro. But I know that was not in style.
I know you, but the whole thing was
that
cringe.
A hoodie?
And Kevin Hart, Cat Williams, and we got a few things to talk to you about. Like,
okay.
Come on, man.
There you have it. One thing we do know about New York, this is going to be the most expensive World Cup final ever, and probably the least accessible. We were in Qatar, and we wondered, how many people would be able to make it there. There was a lot of folks from all over the world. Herc, what do we talk about when you and I talk when it's not about soccer? You live in LA, I live in DC. All we talk about is we complain about property values. The one place that has LA and DC beat, it's New York, man. It's New York, dude. These tickets are going to be crazy. This is going to be an absolutely wildly expensive World Cup final.